Welcome to Strategy Talk, where the authors and editors discuss news and events with a splash of history. Our host today is Dan Masterson. Joining him is Jim Dunnigan, well-known military author and the Dean of Wargaming. Also, joining today's show is columnist and author retired Colonel Austin Bay.
Welcome, Austin and Jim. I've been real curious about the Ukraine war and how it sort of turned into a war of attrition and who's going to be able to win this thing, if you can call it a winner. Jim, you've had some thoughts on what's going to happen here at the end.
Well, Ukraine has all the advantages. Their economy is actually growing. They've got investors from outside, the outside world, as it were, to bring the Ukrainian economy into the economy of the NATO countries. Ukraine also wants to join NATO. Now, NATO's been very reluctant about that, but the Russians have been having failed, as it were, to quickly destroy Ukrainian independence, are now seen as a lesser threat. And the Russian economy is sanctioned. They've run out of money. They're running out of soldiers. They're trying to recruit in Africa, the Middle East, and places like that. That is not going over too well with the countries where they are recruiting.
Now, Jim, you told me that they've lost like a million military
over a million
right?
dead, disabled, and deserters. And they got over a million military-age Russian men have left the country. And they're still trying to. I mean, it's illegal now. So they have to spend a bit of money and take some risks to get out. They can get out Central Asia. They'll get out wherever they can. And it's serious when the major cities like Moscow and St. Petersburg are enduring recruitment hunts, where they send soldiers out to places where there are supposed to be eligible men for military service who are not responding to, how should I put it, demands that they report for, duty. And they're carrying out these hunts, as it were, in major cities. Normally, the major cities are the last ones to feel the economic or, population impact of a war. Most of the troops have been coming from the outback, the Russian outback, Siberia, rural areas, where if anybody complains, it's not going to make the news. But you get a riot in Moscow or St. Petersburg, it's going to make the news worldwide. So Russia is running out of everything. And Russians themselves, Russian civilians are normally, placid. They put up with a lot of stuff. But the impact of this war, especially the economic impact, for over a year, they haven't been able to get, little, treats, as it were, from the West, consumer goods and things like that. And now they're having a hard time getting any goods at all of some items in Russian stores. And they're starting to murmur. Also, the economy is taking a hit. There's a lot more unemployment, even though Russia says it's running out of workers for the military industries and what have you. But people aren't willing to move halfway across Russia to get a so-so job in a plant that makes ammunition. In other words, a lot of Russian people have lost faith in the government's ability to win this war or even keep this war going. And that's how the war is going to end. The Russian people are just going to, put their tools down or, start not showing up for military duty. I mean, the Russians, Putin's trying to recruit the Cubans and any foreigners he can. And he's getting pushback, from Cuba and other countries where he's trying to bring in troops. Because they see, what's the deal? It's an unpopular action. These guys are going to be hauled off by the Russians, die in Ukraine, and the Russia probably won't even pay them, which has already happened. So, Russia has a few, prospects. And I think it's going to be a war of attrition, but the attrition is mostly on the Russian side. I mean, Ukraine, like I say, has the West supporting it. Uh, you mentioned earlier, Western firms are investing in Ukraine. Ukraine is manufacturing over 70% of the munitions it uses in the war, and they are getting investors from the West who want to come in and do joint ventures in Ukraine or other Western countries on production of drones and other weapons that the Ukrainians have basically developed. So the Ukrainian economy is growing, the Western economy isn't. So who's going to win the war? Yeah, it's the numbers.
Austin, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think Jim hit the entire range of issues that point to slow Russian collapse, economic attrition, demographic attrition, attrition of military forces, and also political attrition within Russia and within its array of so-called allies. North Korea is economic dependency is what it amounts to. Virtually, it can be bought, and Russia's buying it, but it's China is the biggest owner there. China is not really an ally of Russia. Jim and I have been discussing for years China's looks at the way China covets Siberia for a lot of reasons. Vast portions of Siberia were once part of the Chinese empire, and Russia has whittled down its forces to where it's questionable, highly questionable, if it can defend Siberia and defend the treasure trove of minerals and energy that lie in Asiatic Siberia. It's go through the other allies. Jim was mentioning Cubans. Well, they're buying them as Cuban mercenaries. Supposedly, there are also some Africans. I've read that it was Chad, possibly the Central African Republic, that remnants of the Wagner mercenary outfit recruited and sent to European Russia to fight in their army. I've seen mentions of it. There was even one I saw, but it was the article in one of the Indian newspapers about Russians trying to recruit Nepalese, and India completely against that. And Russia needs India at least somewhat at its court to buy its oil. I don't know. Jim may have followed that more closely than I had, but the big lesson out of it is that they know they're short of soldiers. They're not making it with Russian Slavs or even Russian, quote unquote, Muslim or Caucasian minority groups. They don't have the soldiers.
Yeah, I think one of the crazy
I ought to add
things.
something else. I'm sorry, I ought to add this too. The Ukrainian attacks, operational, it's got a strategic goal on Russian energy infrastructure, primarily oil and gas distillation or oil and gas shipping pipelines and the like, has had a tremendous effect on Russian. It's crippled what is Russia's most important source of cash, but it's also made the Russian people feel it in long lines at the gas pumps. And also, here comes General Winter. Are they going to have the natural gas to keep the cities warm? We don't know, but that goes back to political intrigue.
Yeah, that's specifically in Western Russia, where their drones can only reach out so far. That's why Zelensky has been wanting to get the cruise missiles from the United States. Now, Zelensky administration has been developing something with a private firm called the Flamingo that can reach out much further, much like our cruise missiles can. Once they have enough of those Flamingos developed, which they're suspecting that they will have enough of them in stock in December or January, then they think they can reach out and hit the refineries further deeper into Russia, and that will have a major effect. The Ukrainians have been very strategic about what they've been doing, about basically going after their refineries there that are close enough. They're in Western Russia, and they're wanting to go further afield, and that's why they've been asking for the access to the NATO cruise missiles and like that.
The Tomahawks.
That's going to be interesting. The Tomahawks, right?
The Tomahawks would do it, but like you said, the Ukrainians are developing their own weapons. Since Ukraine has always gone after energy targets in Russia, even if they can't reach all the way to the east, they can basically hit pipe pumping stations and parts of the pipeline that are difficult to reach and repair. They've been very smart and strategic about their attacks on the Russian fuel storage, refining, and distribution system. I think we're going to see more of that. I mean, that's worked for them. And we will supply them. I don't know if we'll give them Tomahawks. I mean, we should. I mean, they there's only about 5,000 of them made so far. We fired off about 500 to 1,000 for testing and actual combat. But if they turn out to be a critical weapon, we can just up the orders of new ones. I mean, they're not difficult to make. And let the Ukrainians win their war and let that be the end of it. Winning the war in Ukraine would be probably the end for Putin. I don't know if he could talk his way out of that. He's invested so many Russian people, these young men, and so much Russian treasure, and he's got the economy, screwed up with these economic sanctions. I mean, just getting away out of the economic sanctions would be a victory for Putin at this point. Whether or not he'll come to accept that as a suitable victory, only time will tell. But even if you run out of time, like I say, the Russian economy is in bad shape. They can issue all the positive press releases they want, but the numbers tell a different story. There are public satellite companies, making available, eye in the sky pictures of what's going on in Russia, and as Russia, the economy grinds down, we'll have photographic proof of it, and so the Russians can say whatever they want. That, what about these photos? And I think it will come down to how much the Russian people will put up with it. I mean, there's already grumbling. In fact, I did an article recently, it's not been posted yet, about grumbling on the Russian internet and the Russian government trying to crack down. It's hard to crack down on the internet, even if Russia is still trying to create a sovereign internet. In other words, an internet that only exists in Russia, and only select people can get outside access to the outside internet. North Korea already has one, but then again, they don't have an economy to support. I mean, not the kind of economy Russia has, and Russia has the same problem. A sovereign internet can cripple your economy if they don't let enough people get outside access, and if you give too many people outside access, you're not really controlling the message anymore. So Russia has a lot more problems than Ukraine does, and that's what's going to end the war. If the number of Russian problems becomes unbearable, the war stops.
Austin?
Question is, when does that moment come? How many more Ukrainians are going to be killed? This is, and Russians as well. This is where President Trump really has, the term moral high ground, that was generated as a way to swing at the pro-defense crowd during the Cold War. But it really does exist in a lot of issues. And one of the central issues is the utter loss of life and the utter waste of treasure, which, as Jim had talked about, losing lives and Russia and also the cost of the war. Same thing going on in Ukraine. And when does it reach the point that there is a ceasefire that stabilizes? And what do I mean by stability? No, it's not going to be perfect, but you're going to stop the major combat action supported by heavy artillery and drones and the like comes to a halt, and you have real ongoing negotiations, real meaning I think the Ukrainians have made that commitment and showed up for serious negotiations, but the Russians haven't, and that's been because of Putin. So how do you change Putin's conclusion? There is a conclusion he has now that if he just hangs on long enough, he's going to get his way. Now, Jim's laid out all the problems Russia faces that constantly increase. Is it going to take a revolt against the Tsar in St. Petersburg and Moscow? Jim already brought up 1917. Well, who engineers that, given the interior police state that Putin runs? Who are the oligarchs that are going, or where are the oligarchs that are going to help put this operation together? And the generals, are the oligarchs that would put it together, are they in exile in London? Probably, if not exile in Paris or someplace else. Is there a functional resistance inside Russia? I don't know. You hear murmurings that there would be. But until that happens, that Putin is arrested or assassinated, or suddenly sees, I just can't win, and that's going to be such a huge change for a man who has been living a delusion for over 30 years. I mean, he really has. You can see the rhetoric, you can see the policies, you can see his political actions. Also, how he timed his biggest attacks on Ukraine, and at the same time, how it's so obvious that his super 3-day special operation of February 2022 has drastically failed. 3.5 years later, you've got something that looks like World War I withdrawal, except it's not really World War I. You don't have all of the components of the totally hardened front lines, even though you have some defensive fortifications that are, in some ways, modernized Western Front dug in so you can have troops hold ground and they're protected from mass artillery fire. When's Putin going to wake up? I don't know, Dan.
Yeah. Well, it's a shame for the country of Russia, because if you take a look at Russia, they have one of the largest repository of natural resources in the world that has not been exploited yet. It's just sitting there in the ground through Siberia and the other parts of their landmass, that if they had just redirected the monies towards that, they would have, been able to grow their country that way, instead of trying to retake territories that they had lost with the fall of the Berlin Wall. So it's a real shame what's happened there, because they could have made Russia great again through an economic revival that way. So
we also have to keep in mind the Ukraine is keeping its losses down by not going on the offensive, or if they do go on the offensive, they do it with machines. They have ground robots now they've been using in attacks, and in two instances, Russian soldiers surrendered to the robots. When they realized they were being attacked by robots, not by people, and the robots wouldn't feel pain, and they were harder to kill, they said, what are we doing here? You've got more examples of Russians surrendering to drones. It's an unwinnable war for them, and I think the important thing is a lot of the troops are realizing that. Another example of that is what they call zeroing. Russian officers have had the power for, I think, 2 years to shoot any Russian soldier who refuses to fight. There have been about 100 Russian soldiers who have been zeroed out like that. Well, that makes Russian soldiers even more eager, to not get in the army, and if they do get in the army, to get out of Ukraine. So they've had more desertions. If you can't have a war if you've got nobody to fight for you. And I think Austin already pointed that out. But the Ukrainians are deliberately encouraging that. When they put the out, they treat prisoners very well. They have a special program. I forget the name of it. But if you surrender to the Ukrainians, you're well taken care of. If you surrender to the Russians, I don't think they get too many people surrendering to the Russians.
Now, the Russians have
I
upped their
saw
game in the drone war themselves, but they use a different type of drone than the Ukrainians have been using. They've been using drone plans that come out of Iran and like that. They're
Those
more,
are extra heat. Yeah,
right.
they're
So
expensive.
those are the attacks
not
that
really
they've been
worth it.
doing on the populist sites there. That every time Trump thinks he's got an agreement with them, he does a drone attack into into Kyiv or one of the other major cities.
Yeah, the problem with that is they're easy to shoot down, and the Ukrainians have set up, networks with heavy machine guns. And if they and the civilians, from the early in the war, civilians had special software in their cell phones. They could just point at any incoming attack, especially these slow Shahid drones. And the Ukraine has a combat operations center which coordinates all of these reports when they get them, and they can stop most of them. I mean, Russia finds that any time they come up with a weapon that can hit any part of Ukraine, a military target, a civilian target, an economic target, the Ukrainians quickly come up with a countermeasure. Since the Ukrainians are basically playing defense, they're taking far fewer losses. And they basically have, when they train their soldiers, they say, look, you're going to be mostly playing defense, killing Russians, which is very encouraging for the new recruits to hear. Now, they take casualties, but less than a third of what the Russians are losing. And it's even lower now. The Ukrainians know that's a morale factor. And again, you've got to remember, the calculus of numbers. Russia has no allies. Even the Chinese expect to be paid for anything they send them. Cash in advance, please. And Ukraine has NATO supporting them in a big way. And Putin doesn't like to acknowledge that. But as Austin points out, eventually Putin's going to run out of Russians willing to die for his war.
So the hourglass
Dan, I want
on the Russians.
Yeah, Dan, I want to make a comment on the surrendering to drones. First of all, a little step back. The Ukrainians have been on the offensive with their information warfare. You call it propaganda, information warfare, and that, as Jim pointed out, what the Ukrainians tell Russian soldiers will happen to you if you surrender. And then it's backed up by fact, and it's both gossip and also telephone calls and internet videos and the like. Now, I was on a British website, I'm going to say it's 6 weeks ago, and I really tried to magnify it so that I could see it, but it was clear what the Ukrainians claimed was going on. There was a Russian soldier trying to surrender to a Ukrainian drone, and he is killed by a Russian drone, is what happens. Now, I don't know that little incident it was in a British tabloid or on a British tabloid's website, but that is the kind of absolutely devastating detail that has severe morale. It causes morale problems in already stressed Russian units. If it gets out, you're going to be shot by your own drones. Now, of course, the Russians still operate with the mentality that they were going to have convict battalions that they send out, and the Chekists or the military police behind them will shoot them if they don't attack. They've already used that the Russians have used that technique in Ukraine, but it ultimately backfires. And the Ukrainians have made that point repeatedly. at a media level that may not reach the Russian people, but for at least Russian troops inside Ukraine that are within the radio, internet distance, cell phone distance like that. They know that that's what's going on, and that's the way they're treated. Now, is that enough explosive for a military revolt? I don't think so right now. But it's ultimately, and this goes back to what Jim was saying from the beginning. Look at all the other problems. This is a small one, or it's really not a small one, but it's the kind that could ignite a larger rebellion within the ranks. It's certainly had a deleterious effect on Russian recruitment because, as Jim says, over 1 million Russian men are in exile, and it's military exile. They're fleeing. They've gone to pick up a Vietnam War metaphor. They fled to Canada, wherever Canada is. There are a lot of Canadas, including Turkey, that these would-be Russian conscripts have been living in, many of them for over 3 years, at least 3 years. So it's the Russians' own actions are getting, I'm talking about Putin's Russian cadres. What they do to their own troops, it's not hidden. This isn't Stalin's army in 1943-44. This is an army that is exposed to global internet media, digital media, maybe not real time, but within 5 or 6 days. And it shows up on websites that have a couple of 100 million hits a day. It gets out.
Yep. Well, we'll continue to watch the situation and update people as we find out more. We'll be back next month at the beginning of the month. We've had a couple of rough months here and we haven't been around, but we think we've got everything rectified. And so we'll see you gentlemen next
December.
month. Yep, in December. We'd like to tell everybody that likes our content to like and subscribe us, and like and subscribe to our channel. And we'll see you all next time. Bye.
Take care.
Bye, guys.
Bye.